Ջրմամձես Connecting Global-ի խորագրով համաժողովին, որի նպատակն է լույս բերել Հայաստանում կրթության միջազգայնացման վրա, իրավերով ստանդարտացված տեսավորումը, սահմանելով դասավանդումը և շարունակելով մասնագիտացման զարգացման գործընթացը։ Հանդիպման ընթացքում ձեզ կներկայացնեն 3 կրթական հաստատությունների աշխատանքի գործը, որոնք այս բնագավառում բավականին լուրջ քայլեր են ձեռնարկել։ Համաժողովի ցուցելու համար խոսքը փոխանցում եմ Հայաստանում Մեծ Բրիտանիայի դեսպան Կեթրին, Հայաստանի կրթության և գիտության նախարար Արմեն Աշոտյանին և Լիբերալական խորհրդի հայաստանյան գրասենյակի տնօրեն Ալեքսանդր Սարիբեկյանին։
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming to this IELTS conference. It's always a pleasure to have the opportunity to speak to such a great bunch of committed, enthusiastic English teachers and language professionals. I came last year to the same conference, and I remember saying then that as a linguist myself, I know what a tough job you do, what an important job you do. And you have a really hard act to follow, because the standard of English teaching in Armenia has traditionally been so impressive, so good. But you mustn't rest on your laurels. You must continue to improve, to adapt, and I know that the fact that you're here means that that's what you intend to do. We're here to talk about IELTS today, and I'm really pleased to say that IELTS continues to grow exponentially across the world in all sorts of markets, and is increasingly seen as the gold standard of English language qualifications. Last year in 2014, 2 million students across the world sat IELTS exams. So we strongly believe that in Armenia, the future of your education system, of your educational reforms, is to continue to connect those global educational standards. And I know that that's something that Minister Ashotyan feels very, very strongly and passionately. And this connection to global standards, to global best practice, we believe can be underpinned in the English language teaching by the IELTS qualification. And of course your partner in promoting IELTS, in working with IELTS methodologies, is British Council, and I want to use this opportunity to say thank you to Arabic, to her whole team at the British Council, to Ade, who's a recent addition to the British Council team, for the enormous work which they've been doing to pioneer some of these innovative approaches to language teaching, to training trainers, to building partnerships with many of your institutions. They've done a great job over the last more than 10 years that the British Council has operated in Armenia, and I'm convinced that they'll continue to build on that foundation over the next 10 years. So thank you, Arabic, for your hard work. Thank you for our guest speaker today, and thank you, Minister Ashotyan, for your support for the work of the British Council, and for your focus and commitment on driving up quality and international standards in Armenian education. Thank you.
Շնորհակալ եմ, արգելատիկին դեսպան, արգելի Արևիկ, տիկնայք և պարոնեք, սիրելի մանկավարժներ, այսօր եւս մեկ առիթով ենք հանդիպում, բայց ուզում եմ նախ առաջ շնորհավորել բոլոր կին մանկավարժներին կանանց միացյալի կապակցությամբ։ Մի մասին հանդիպել եմ, մի մասին դեռ կհանդիպեմ, բայց այսպիսի գեղեցիկ լսարան այսօր չեմ կարող չհիշել եւ անպայման ուզում եմ ձեզ ամենալավ մաղթանքները ձեզ ուղղել նաեւ այս առիթով։ Ինչ վերաբերում այսօրվա հավաքին, սիրելի մանկավարժներ, գիտեք, թե վերջի տարիներին մենք ինչպիսի ուշադրություն ենք դարձնում կրթության միջազգայնացման ընդլայնմանը Հայաստանում։ Հայաստանի կրթական համակարգը խարսխված լինելով ազգային դպրոց կառուցելու գերակայության վրա, միաժամանակ կրելով խորհրդային դպրոցի լավ ավանդույթները, այսօր միտված է դեպի ժամանակակից եւ արդիական կրթական ծառայություններ մատուցելուն, ինչն անհնար է առանց միջազգայնացման ընդլայնվող ծավալների։ Միջազգայնացման տարբերակներից մեկը, եթե չասեմ գերագույնը, այսօր նաեւ մեզ համար լեզվաիմացության մակարդակի բարձրացման ծրագրերն են, որոնք ուղղված են յուրաքանչյուր աշակերտի եւ ուսանողի մոտ ձևավորելու նոր տեսակի հմտություններ, ընդլայնելով մեր երիտասարդների հնարավորությունները տեղեկություն ստանալու շրջակա աշխարհից այն հաղորդակցման մեթոդներով եւ լեզուներով, որոնք այս պահին իրենց համար հասանելի չեն։ Ավելորդ է խոսել անգլերենի կարևորության մասին այսօր ժամանակակից աշխարհում հաջողակ մասնագետ դառնալու համար գիտնական թե պարզապես աշխատաշուկայում իր տեղը փնտրող երիտասարդ մասնագետ անհնար է պատկերացնել առանց օտար լեզուների իմացության եւ մասնավորապես ու հատկապես անգլերենի։ Երկար ժամանակ է, ինչ մենք բրիտանական խորհրդի հետ միասին իրականացվող ծրագրերի շրջանակներում ցանկություն ունենք բարելավելու անգլերենի դասավանդման մակարդակը եւ որակը մեր դպրոցներում։ Եվ ուզում եմ առաջին հայտնել մեր գործընկերներին, իրենց բրիտանական խորհրդի եւ Մեծ Բրիտանիայի դեսպանատանը այս ծրագրերին այսքան մեծ ուշադրություն դարձնելու համար։ Եթե նախկինում օտար լեզվի իմացությունը մրցակցային առավելություն էր անհատների համար, այս կամ այն ճանապարհով ավելի արագ ու առաջ ընկնելու համար, այսօր խոստովանենք, իսկ վաղը առավել եւս դա ուղղակի պաշտոնեական նկարագրի պարտադիր մաս է լինելու։ Լեզվաիմացությունը, օտար լեզուների իմացությունը ոչ թե առավելություն է, այլ պարտադիր պայման։ Սա կարևոր փոփոխություն է գաղափարական, որպեսզի մենք առավել մեծ քանակի երիտասարդների մոտ արթնացնենք ցանկությունը լավ սովորելու օտար լեզուներ։ Իհարկե բոլորս գիտենք, որ հայ երիտասարդության մեջ այսօր աճող հետաքրքրություն կա հատկապես անգլերենի նկատմամբ եւ այստեղ որակի աճը հիմնականում մասնավոր նախաձեռնություններ, լրացուցիչ անհատական պարապմունքների մոտիվացիայի եւ այլն։ Սա չի նշանակում, որ պետությունը պետք է պատասխանատվությունը այս դաշտում փոքրացնի եւ հույսը դնի միայն իր երիտասարդների նախաձեռնողականության կամ ծնողների հնարավորությունների։ Ճիշտ հակառակը մենք կարծում ենք, որ լեզվաիմացության մակարդակը խորացնելու համար շատ կարևոր է, որպեսզի ուսումնական հաստատություններից դպրոցից սկսած լեզվի դասավանդման մեթոդաբանությունը բովանդակությունը լինի արդիական, եւ սա է պատճառը, որ մենք նման տեսակի հավաքներին միշտ ուշադրություն ենք դարձնում, ակնկալելով կոնկրետ արդյունքներ։ Ես այսօր եկել եմ, որպեսզի ձեզ կոնկրետ արդյունքով ուրախացնեմ բրիտանական խորհրդի գործընկերներին, երկար տարիներ ինչ նախարարությունը համագործակցում է British Council-ի հետ IELTS ծրագրի շրջանակներում եւ մեր գերագույն նպատակներից մեկն էր, որպեսզի հասնենք մի վիճակի, երբ որ նախարարության կողմից IELTS քննությունը ճանաչվի որպես անգլերենի իմացության միջազգային սերտիֆիկացված քննություն։ Ուզում եմ ձեզ ուրախացնել, որ հաջորդ տարվանից կրթության եւ գիտության նախարարության կողմից IELTS-ի տրված վկայականները համապատասխան նիշերի պարագայում ճանաչվելու են Հայաստանի Հանրապետությունում որպես անգլերենի իմացության փաստաթղթեր հավասար կերպով, ինչպես որ մենք ճանաչում ենք այս պահին միայն TOEFL համակարգի արդյունքները։ Ոստի հաջորդ տարվանից հայ ասպիրանտները, գիտնականները, այլ երիտասարդներ, որոնք այս կամ այն պետական ծրագրերի են հավակնում, կարող են իրենց լեզվաիմացության մակարդակը հաստատել նաև IELTS-ի սերտիֆիկատներով։ Կարծում եմ սա եւս մեկ լրացուցիչ ազդակ կլինի երիտասարդներին սովորելու անգլերեն եւ հանդգնելու, խիզախելու, հանձնել նաև նման տեսակի միջազգային ստուգատեսային քննություններ։ Շնորհակալ եմ համատեղ աշխատանքի համար, կանխավ հայցում եմ ձեր նորողամտությունը, եթե ավելի շուտ լքեմ դալիճը, քան դուք կաշխատեք։ Շնորհակալ եմ։
IELTS-ի ընդունման հետ կապված, որտեղ իսկապես մենք երկար տարիներ համագործակցում ենք իրար հետ, և փորձում ենք գտնել ուղիներ IELTS-ի ճանաչվածությունը Հայաստանում ավելի բարձրացնելու համար, եւ կարծում եմ, որ նախարարության հետ այս համագործակցությունը մեզ ավելի լայն հնարավորություններ կտա հաստատությունների հետ աշխատելու եւ ավելի սերտորեն մեր հնարավոր բոլոր ռեսուրսները ներդնելու ձեզ աջակցելու համար։ Իրականում խոսքս այլ կերպ եմ սկսել։ Ինչ ինչ եմ ուզում նշել, նախորդում եմ բոլորիդ իսկապես հրաշալի է ձեզ տեսնել մեր բոլոր միջոցառումների եւ բազմականակ այցելուների թիվը իրականում ապացուցում է, որ անգլերեն լեզվի իմացությունը եւ դրա զարգացման կարեւորությունը այսօր Հայաստանում շատ մեծ է։ Եվ ես ուրախ եմ, որ այսօր, երբ տնտեսական եւ քաղաքական այս անորոշ իրադարձությունների եւ իրականության մեջ մենք ունենք մի ոլորտ, որը իսկապես չի դավաճանում իր առաջնահերթություններին, դա կրթության ոլորտն է եւ կրթության որակի բարձրացումը, բարելավումը հստակ առաջնահերթություն է Հայաստանի համար, հենց Բոլոնիա գործընթացի շրջանակներում դա ապացուցվում է եւ ուրախ եմ եւ ողջունում ենք բոլոր այն ջանքերը թե կառավարության կողմից թե կրթական հաստատությունների կողմից, ովքեր այսօր ջանք չեն խնայում, որպեսզի կրթության ընդհանրապես որակը համապատասխանեցնեն միջազգային ստանդարտներին։ Սա հատկապես կարևոր է այսօր գլոբալիզացման այս դարում, երբ շատ մեծանում են հնարավորությունները միջազգային համագործակցության, երբ շատ մեծանում է նաև արդեն ներքին առողջ մրցակցությունը, բնականաբար որակի բարձրացումը դառնում է արդեն կարևոր։ Եվ բնականաբար այս կոնտեքստում արդեն պարզապես կրթված քաղաքացի մեծացնելը միակ առաջնահերթությունը չի, պետք է մեծացնել քաղաքացի, ով կարող է գլոբալ այս աշխարհում գլոբալ հասարակության մեջ ապրել եւ աշխատանք գտնել։ Ես որպես ծնող եւ որպես բրիտանական խորհրդի տնօրեն ուզում եմ շնորհակալություն հայտնել ձեր բոլորիդ, մեր երեխաների կրթության եւ բարեկեցիկ ապագայի համար ձեր ներդրումների համար։ Բրիտանական խորհուրդը միշտ ձեր կողքին է, մենք ունենք տարբեր ռեսուրսներ, մենք ունենք թե նյութեր, որոնք անընդհատ թարմացվում են եւ պատրաստ ենք տրամադրել, աջակցել, համագործակցել բոլորիդ հետ, որպեսզի այդ նյութերը դուք կարողանաք իրականացնել, օգտագործել ձեր հաստատություններում։ Անգլերենի դասավանդման ընթացքում մենք ունենք ուսուցիչների վերապատրաստման ծրագրեր, թե առցանց, թե դասընթացների ձևով, որը պատրաստ ենք ձեզ նորից տրամադրել եւ ինչպես արդեն պարոն Աշոտյանը նշեց, մենք իրականացնում ենք IELTS եւ մեկ այլ ակցիս քննությունները, որոնք միջազգային ստանդարտներին համապատասխան քննություններ են եւ որոնք հույսով ենք, որ կօգնեն մեր բուհերին եւ պետական կրթական հաստատություններին իրենց որակը իսկապես չափանիշները բարձրացնելու եւ հասցնելու միջազգային ստանդարտներին։ Եվ մինչեւ ավարտելը ուզում էի ձեզ փոխանցել, որ Բրիտանական խորհուրդը բնականաբար միայնակ չեն, կան շատ միջազգային կազմակերպություններ, տարբեր լեզուների, անգլերենի, գերմաներենի եւ ֆրանսերենի լեզվի աջակցման հարցում պատրաստ են ձեզ օգնել եւ այսօր իմ գոլեգան Գոսե ինստիտուտից խնդրեց ձեզ փոխանցել, որ սեպտեմբերի 26-ից 27-ը նմանատիպ մի համաժողով կազմակերպելու է նաեւ գերմաներեն լեզվի ուսուցիչների համար, այնպես որ դուք միայնակ չեք, մենք ձեր կողքին ենք եւ միշտ ուրախ ենք համագործակցել։ Շնորհակալություն։ For the first speech, I would kindly invite Michael to deliver his talk. Michael graduated from the University of Bradford in 1984. After teaching English in Spain and Japan, he joined the British Council in 1990, and since then he worked for the organizations in Hong Kong, Portugal, UK, Japan, India, and Austria. Mike is currently based in Spain, where he is the IELTS Business Development Manager for Europe. Mike's speech is entitled IELTS in an Age of Change. Please join me to welcome him.
Well, this is my retirement speech, I think, today. 52, about 70. I'm not doing bad for 70. Right. Thanks very much. Can everybody hear me? Yeah. My name's Mike Welsh, and as I was introduced, I'm the IELTS Business Development Manager for Europe, and my patch covers really from, if you go over to the left, I cover Portugal, right over to Kazakhstan, and I think the furthest north is Finland, and it goes right the way down to Israel, the furthest south, and all points in between. And this is the second time I've been to Armenia, and it's fabulous to be back. I'm really, really happy to be back here. And I've been asked today to talk about IELTS and exams and globalization, which is potentially a little bit of a boring subject. So I just want to start off really, I've got a confession to make. But before I make my confession, I want to ask all of you a quick question. Okay, and to do this, I just want you to close your eyes. Close your eyes. Close your eyes. Right, now I want you to think back to a time when you're going to take an important exam. And it's the night before that exam. How do you feel? In 24 hours, you're going to be walking into that exam room. How do you feel? Right, open your eyes. My question to you is, how many of you like exams? I've got three psychopaths here. Right. Okay. Well, let me turn that question around. How many of you don't like exams very much? The vast majority. And I have to say, despite my job as IELTS Business Development Manager, which is connected with exams, I'm with you. I'm with the majority. I'm not particularly fond of exams. And I've had connections with exams stretching back to when I was 10 years old, when I took 11 plus. And that exam basically decided which type of school I went to in the UK. And really, looking back on it, at that point, it was deciding what my future career path was going to be, whether I was going to go to university, whether I was going to get a job, all resting on the exam that I took when I was 10 years old. I didn't realise the importance of the exam at that time. But a few years ago, I actually took a year off and I went back to university to do a master's degree at Lancaster University. And I thoroughly enjoyed the year. It was a fantastic year, a year off work. I was able to stretch my mind in different ways that I hadn't stretched it before. But as part of my year in Lancaster, I had to take exams. And I realised again that I wasn't very fond of them. And I remember there was one particular exam, I had to go in and do an economics exam. And like a good student, I went to the library well in advance of my exam, and I pulled out the previous 3 years' worth of exams papers, and I looked at the exam papers, went through them very carefully, and I got the rubric, so it was a 2-hour exam, and I had to answer 3 questions, so I had to have about 40 minutes worth of knowledge about 3 subjects. But the key thing that I noticed in this research that I was doing, that every single question on the exam paper for the previous 3 years was identical. Word for word identical. And I thought, aha, I see a trend here. The only thing that had changed was the date on the top of the exam. So we didn't have a particularly dynamic economics teacher. So I duly studied for 3 subjects, about 40 minutes worth of knowledge. And the next day, I walked into the test, and as I walked towards the desk, I sat down, feeling relatively confident. I turned the paper over, and at that moment, you know what it's like when you realise that you have made a terrible, terrible mistake. Because not only had they changed the amount of time that the exam was going to be lasting from 2 hours to 3 hours, they'd also changed the number of questions from 3 to 2. So that meant that I needed an hour and a half's worth of knowledge, and they changed every single question on the paper as well. So I sat there thinking, I don't like exams. So I come to this talk, fast forward a few years, and I've been travelling a lot recently, and I've been asked to do this talk here in Armenia, and I'm thinking, who should be interested in what I've got to say? And I found this picture of Little Red Riding Hood. to try and illustrate exactly who should be interested. And I started sitting down and making this. This was at the weekend, and my 9-year-old daughter came over to me and she said, "What are you doing, Dad?" So I explained that I've got to go to Armenia, and I've got to be doing this presentation to various people connected with education about exams. And I explained a little bit of background, and I said, well, I found this picture of Little Red Riding Hood. And she turned around to me and she said two things, in fact. She said, "How do you know that the people in Armenia know about Little Red Riding Hood? And secondly, that's not Little Red Riding Hood. That's Snow White." So I sent her to bed without any supper, and I changed it slightly. And just to sort of identify who should be interested, really there are two categories. There are the test users and the test takers. Test takers are the people who have to prove that they have a skill, that they have some sort of knowledge. The test users, on the other hand, are the people who need proof that somebody has a particular skill. And we can simply break down test users and test takers into three broad groups, all beginning with I. We've got industry, institutions, and individuals. And they're all connected. Government provides the framework for all of this. But if we've got industry, really basically what industry is doing is making sure that they've got the right people to do what they want to do. Institutions, I'm here talking about mainly education institutions, need to make sure that they are feeding the right people through into industry. And the individuals, in this case the test takers, are the people who are going into industry via the education institution. So we can see that this is all linked together. I'm determined to use my picture of Snow White. But I changed the question now. Instead of who should be interested, to why you should be interested. And by means of my introduction here, what I want to say here really is that it's not always clear why you should be interested in something. Sometimes you actually have to look quite hard and close to discover that there's something that doesn't spring off the page in you. And if you look closely at this, the cry from my heart is really, as I go through my talk today, keep an open mind. Try and make the connection with exams and globalization and IELTS and your own situation. Look into it. Because if you actually look at this picture of Snow White, you can see hidden inside it something that you might not have seen right at the beginning. Can anybody see a literary character? Sherlock Holmes. So embedded in it, you've got Sherlock Holmes. And it's just to illustrate that basically it might not be, can you see it? Hat, the pipe, nose. So it's not always obvious right at the beginning, but if you actually think carefully and make a leap, then you can see what the connections are. Alright, I'm going to speak about 4 things really today. I'm going to talk a little bit more about exams. I then want to have a look at globalization. I want to dig into IELTS, the International English Language Testing System. Can I just ask very quickly, people, are you familiar with IELTS? Yes? Familiar? No idea what we're talking about? Okay, sort of no? Yeah. I've come across IELTS. You're all right to say that, right? Okay, and then I want to, right at the end, wrap up, try and bring all this together in the shape of a case study. Okay, let's focus on exams first of all. We've all decided that basically the vast majority of people, sane people, don't like exams particularly. So I ask this question, are exams evil? Are exams a necessary evil? Well, let me just explore the statement, are exams a necessary evil? In fact, is there such a thing as a necessary evil? And my argument would be, if something is evil, it can't be necessary. And if it's necessary, it can't be evil. So we have to change the question again to, are exams necessary? We don't like them, but are they necessary? And my argument is, actually, yes, they are necessary. Are they perfect? No, they're not. Exams, really, what we need to do is to make sure that they adhere to three sort of principles, really. That they're practical. What are we trying to do with an exam? We're trying to make sure that we are aware of what somebody's knowledge about a subject is. Now, the best way to explore what somebody's knowledge is to follow them for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and observe them. But it's not practical. So we have to find an alternative way in order to judge whether somebody has the right amount of knowledge. They've got to be standardized. So the results from a test in different conditions have to be the same. It's no good having 1 month a very easy test or a very easy exam, and then the next month a very difficult exam. It's not fair on the test users or the test takers. So you have to have some sort of standardization and repeatability. And the other thing is that they have to be fair. And to be fair to everybody, they've got to be secure. There's no good giving a test or an exam and then using, as in my example, the same questions in the next round of testing. It's unfair on the people who've been testing, because if you'd repeated, as in my example in Lancaster, if I'd gone into the same room and just used the questions they had before, that doesn't give a fair indication of what my knowledge of economics is. All that does is to say, I'm good at researching and I've got a good memory. So, are exams necessary? Yes, they are, but they have to be under certain conditions. And there are more pros and cons to exams. There are different types of exams, different lengths of exams. You can have multiple choice exams. You can have free exams. You can have open book exams. All of them really have got pros and cons. But one of the major pro-con, in fact, for an exam is the fact that you have to set a level at which point you pass the test, you pass the exam. So you have to decide what is the score which means I passed it. And what happens then to a person if they score 1 point below that? Do you push them up? That's not fair. Do you let them fail? That doesn't seem fair. So in fact, sort of, this black and white pass-fail seems to be sort of a problem that's inherent and built into exams. I must say that I had written this this next slide before a recent film was released. I have to change it. So there's a difference between exams, which you pass or fail, and a test, which really works on a spectrum. You can't fail a test. You can fail to get the appropriate score, but effectively you are placed on a position on a spectrum which tells you how good or how bad you are. So it's the shades of grey. Let me pause there. That's pretty much all I want to say about exams at this point, but I want to come back to them. And I want to sort of start setting this into the context of globalisation, and particularly the globalisation of education. Kofi Annan once said that arguing against the forces of globalisation is actually like arguing against the forces of gravity. It's daft. Okay, it's inevitable. And if you actually look back through history, and you go right back to the beginning of early man and humans coming out of Africa, I'll show you a map here. This is an example of the earliest form of globalization, when humans came out of Africa, and they came up through Europe, across Asia, India, down into Australasia there, and down to South America. Okay, this particular wave of globalization took thousands and thousands and thousands of years, but it's globalization. But globalization really, over the last 200 years, has picked up speed massively. And I want to show you three pictures, three maps that really demonstrate for me the drivers behind globalization. The first one, trade and business. The major drive behind globalization in the last couple of hundred years has been about trading with neighbours. Now, many, many years ago, most of the trade was done with the village next door. And what you found then is when you're actually trading with that village, the ability to communicate, even if it was across a national boundary, was there. Any village sat next to another village can usually understand the communication, the language of the neighbouring village. But the problem comes when trade stops being with village to village and it becomes country to country or country to continent, where the distances of the trade are actually increasing. So what happens then is they still have to communicate, and they need a lingua franca. They need to be able to talk to the person that they're actually doing the trading with. And for better or worse, the language of trade and the language of the world is English. Through a quirk of fate, I was born in an English-speaking country, I speak English. I am lucky. I don't want to go into the historical reasons why English has become dominant. But one of the reasons that research seems to indicate is that English at a basic level is actually quite an easy language to get up to a certain level. It might take years to master the nuances and the subtleties of the language, but really to be functional, to be able to operate in a trade system, you can do that quite quickly. The third map I want to show you, which is a driver behind globalization, particularly over the last 20 years, is a map of the internet. This has been a game changer, absolutely massive game changer. And globalization has also come to education, partly because of the drivers, okay, and also becoming a driver in itself. I'm not going to go into details about the Bologna process. You all know about the Bologna process. Armenia is a signatory to this. It's a bit chicken and egg, which comes first? Does the Bologna process promote globalization of education, or is globalization sort of resulting in the Bologna process? It doesn't really matter. Yeah? It's there. But the second map that I showed you about language brings me to this slide, which is the Common European Framework of Reference. So anybody who wants to go and study in another country has to either study in the local language or increasingly through the medium of English. So how do you actually marry up? How do you make sure that somebody is of the right level in order to be able to study in a different country? So the CEFR, the Common European Framework of Reference, was devised as a very simple mechanism to work for all languages, not just English, in order to try and get a framework that would allow institutions and industry, going back to my starting point, to know how good somebody's language skill is. Keep that in the back of your mind, I'm going to come back to that in a minute. This slide really shows the massive explosion of transnational education. A little more than 10 years ago, there were about 500 master's programs being taught through the medium of English across the whole of Europe. 5 years after that, that has grown and tripled really to about 1,500. 5 years after that, it's gone up to well over 6,000. In fact, if you factor in all the undergraduate programs and everything else that goes on, that figure is well over 30,000 now. It's massive. And this is just the English taught programs. This doesn't count the people who are going overseas and studying in the local language. And the third slide I showed, which was the internet one, I said that was a game changer. That's come to education as well. That's part of the experience of this globalization of education. Do you recognise any of these icons? We've got Booking.com, Expedia, and Study Portals, which is an education portal. And how this has changed is that people are no longer relying on the official line. So, for example, I had to go and visit Paris, and I was staying at a hotel, and I've always had a problem with Paris because every time I go to Paris, the hotels that the office in Paris puts me in are always terrible. I don't know why, whether I'm just unlucky or what happens, but they're always terrible. So, for example, the first one I went in and I unlocked the door, went to open the door, and the door handle came off. I walked towards the bed, which wasn't far, it was quite small. The floor, the carpet was sticky, so I could feel some of my shoes sticking to the carpet. I went to the window to pull the curtains because I didn't want to shock any of the neighbours, and as I pulled it, the curtain rail came down and landed on top of me. So it's become a little bit of a running joke that every time I go to Paris, the office always puts me in a terrible hotel. And I went one time, and I came down for breakfast, and as I was going off to the office, I found that the front door of the hotel, the whole of the front door, had disappeared. It had been demolished. Gone. So I stepped out, and I got my iPad, and I took a photograph of this empty space, meaning to go into the office and have a bit of a laugh with the people working there and saying, yeah, you put me into a great hotel this time, no front door. So I went in, explained, we had a laugh, and I came back that evening. And the receptionist called me over and he said, can I just have a word with you? So I said yes. And he said, we noticed this morning that when you were going out, you took a photograph of the front of the hotel. Can you tell us why? So I said, well, every time I come to Paris, I always get put into not a very good hotel. And he said, oh, that's a relief, because we thought you were going to post a review on Expedia. And we have a very good reputation on Expedia. And so they were very, very worried that they were losing control of the message. And that I was going to, in some way, undermine the business. I hadn't thought about that, but it was a really good idea, because when I went up to my hotel room that evening, there was a big bottle of champagne in my room as a way of thanking me. So they got a very good review, in fact. The same is happening in education with study portals. Study portals have launched SEX, which is student experience. And this allows students to talk directly with each other, to tell each other what they think of the place they're studying, the institution, the faculty, all these things that you need to know before you make a decision to go away and study. So the internet really is a game changer. All right, that's the second part. So we've done exams, a little tour of that. We've looked at globalization and the globalization of education. I want to come to IELTS. How does IELTS fit into all this? IELTS is a test. It's an English language test. And it's designed really fundamentally to assess a test taker's ability to speak English. it's aimed at the test taker, but we're also interested in making sure that the test user, the education institutions or industry, their needs are being met as well. There are 3 partners that own IELTS. It's the British Council, IDP Australia, and the University of Cambridge. And the University of Cambridge is the organisation that's tasked with actually creating tests. They've got over 100 years of experience in designing tests. And the British Council and IDP, our role is for the distribution of the test and to work with partners to make sure that we're adding value and we're supporting the people who are actually making use of the test. A couple of numbers, 135 countries, so IELTS is available in 135. Where's the ambassador gone? Slightly contradictory, she said 2 million. In fact, it was 2.3 million test takers. So there were, in the last 12 months, we've delivered 2.3 million tests. So that's the number of test takers. 9,000 and 3,000. There are 9,000 organisations and institutions globally that are using IELTS. And over 3,000 of those are in the US. And there's a bit of a misnomer, there's a bit of a misunderstanding. Some people think that IELTS is for the UK, for Australia, and that they have other exams, TOEFL, for the US. That's not true. IELTS is accepted in over 3,000 institutions in the US. So it's truly the global test. And you can see the Armenian flag right in the centre there, available here to the British Council. Very, very quickly, there are 2 types of IELTS test, what we call the general training. That's designed for people who are going to live where English is the main language, and the academic module, and that's for people who are going to study through the medium of English. All 4 skills are tested, so listening, reading, writing and speaking. The listening and the speaking item are the same for both versions, and the reading and the writing are slightly different depending on which version you're taking. There will be a 3rd version coming along soon because of the changes in UK immigration. It's a test, it's not an exam. You can't fail the IELTS test. You can fail to get the score that you need in order to go and do what you want to do with it, but basically you are placed on a spectrum from 0 to 9 with half points in there. This maps on very neatly to the CEFR. I know the CEFR is going to change shortly, but at the moment it maps on neatly. And one of the key things that you need to do is make sure that there are alternative tests on the market. Ask for the research. Has the mapping been done correctly? Can you see the research? Because it's the responsibility of the people who make the test to actually map the test onto the CEFR. It's not the CEFR's job, or the Council of Europe's job, to map tests onto its own system. So you have to make sure that that's been done properly. Has it ever changed? If it hasn't changed, there's a suspicion that they think, that'll do, that's okay, but that's not necessarily the case. IELTS is tried and tested. We've been around for about 25 years. Every item in an IELTS test takes about 2 years to make. It's authentic. We use different types of English, not just British English. It's personal. There's a face-to-face element in speaking, which is very important because communication is not just verbal. And it's secure. Do you remember I said right at the beginning about fairness and making sure that everybody has a fair crack at the whip? Then, again, we take a great deal of effort to make sure that the IELTS test is secure and that it's fair for everybody. That's IELTS. Okay, let me try and pull all this together in a quick case study. Sciences Po is a very prestigious organisation in France. And we've been working with Sciences Po for a number of years now. And they use IELTS at 3 points in the journey of a student going through their programme. At the beginning, in the middle, and at the end. At the beginning, Sciences Po wants to make sure that it's got the right students coming into its program. It has to have a test that's reliable. So it uses, amongst others, IELTS in order to make sure that it's recruiting the right students. In the third year of the program, a lot of the students go out into industry. They either go to another educational institution or they go into a company or a firm to work. What Sciences Po needs to do is to make sure that it's matching the students that are going out into that third year with the right opportunity. So again, they can take any test, 99% of them take IELTS, but this allows Sciences Po to actually place the students into the right placement. In the fifth year, in the final year, IELTS is part of the graduation process. So in order to get a certificate to say you graduated from Sciences Po, not only do you have to pass all the other tests for the main subject areas, but you have to have scored, I think it's 7 or 7.5 on IELTS or equivalent. So that means the students are therefore able to exit the program not only with a certificate that proves that they have knowledge in the core subject, but they also have proof that they can speak English to a certain standard. And that's very good for industry. This old Benjamin Franklin, I love this picture actually, the old Benjamin Franklin quote, by failing to prepare, you're preparing to fail. What happens here, you can see underneath the 2 and 3 there, there's a lot of work done by the faculty at Sciences Po to make sure that the students are well prepared to take the IELTS test. And one of the things that the British Council can do is to work with institutions to help students get ready for taking the IELTS test. And the analogy I like to use here is, I'm going to be a proud father. I've got my daughter, who obviously is much more intelligent than I am when it comes to pictures of fairy story characters. I have a son, he's 16 years old, and he plays a lot of football. And he plays to a reasonably high standard. Last year, his team played against Real Madrid twice, Atletico Madrid, Rayo Vallecano. So he plays to a reasonable standard. And there are 2 things as a footballer that he needs to do. Number 1, he's got to have the right skills. He's got to be able to track the ball, he's got to be able to look around, he's got to be able to pass. He's got to have the fundamental skills. But he's also got to be fit. If he's not fit, it doesn't matter how good his skills are, he'll never get close enough to the ball in order to demonstrate them. And it's exactly the same with English language skills when you're taking an exam. It's vital that people know what the rubric is. Cast your mind back to my story about Lancaster when I went into the economics. I got that totally wrong. I'd studied the wrong number of subjects, I had the wrong amount of knowledge, I got the rubric completely wrong. So one of the key things that we do in order to help people prepare is to get them fit for IELTS, to make sure that they know what the format is, what to expect. Because if you take that out of the equation, they can focus on the skills, which is demonstrating how good their English is. So in this scenario, the test users, which is Sciences Po, the institution in France, benefits. They have the right students coming into the program. They're able to maintain a very good relationship with all their partners they're sending students to in the 3rd year. Because they are sending the right students. And they're able to add value to their program by having the IELTS test as the exit, as part of the exit criteria. The test takers, the people who actually suffer through the exam, through the test itself, they benefit Because when they go out into a competitive market, and it's getting increasingly competitive, they're well equipped. Not only do they have the certificate, but they also have demonstrable proof that they can speak English. So it's a win-win situation. I'm going to pause there, and now I'm going to put it all together. I'm going to show you a slide now, and remember I said right at the beginning, it's up to you to make your own connections. You need to make sure that you're seeing what's in it for you. This slide for me pulls it all together. Can you see the square in the middle of the slide? If you can't see it, I've failed. Can you see it? Nobody? No, it's inside, it's not the edge. It's inside. Can you see it? Come on, help me here, people. Right, let me see if I can help you. We were talking about industry, and the importance of industry, and trade, etc., bringing all this together. Let me take that out. The institutions pairing up with industry. And the third eye was the individuals. Can you see the square? It's not there yet. The fourth eye, which I want to add in now, is IELTS and how this fits in with this bigger picture. And if I put them all in there now you should be able to see the square. How it all fits together. And if I take out that, can you see where I'm going with this? And I draw it together. Go and talk this.
Our next speaker is British Council Armenian ELT Projects Manager Adel Razakyan. Adel will be introducing you to ACTIS and will highlight how this test can benefit educational institutions. Please join me to welcome him.
Okay, good afternoon everyone, and thank you so much for accepting my invitation. My name is Adel, and I'm the ELT Projects Manager of British Council. This introduction is for those of you who are still addressing me with Mrs. I'm May. Recognize it. So thank you so much for coming. My presentation today is about ACTIS, and I'm going to introduce you to this test, which is actually an innovative assessment tool. And it has been produced by British Council, and I hope that this presentation will help you to kind of understand how you can use this test in order to standardize the students' proficiency procedures, if you want to place them. Before I start this presentation, can you please raise your hand if you're familiar with this test? No, you have an idea of what this is about. Yeah. Okay, good. Then yeah. Well, I said that you don't like exams, and I'm going to talk about it in the exam. So you need to bear with me for the next 45 minutes. Yeah. Oh, I turned it off. Okay. Good. So this is the outline of my presentation. I'm going to first introduce you to the general version of the test, and by doing so, I want to highlight its key features in terms of its structure, the delivery format, the scoring system, and how you can use it. And then I'm going to focus on two different variants of this test, namely ACTIS for teens and ACTIS for teachers. And I think these are the products which you will be more interested because you are ELT specialists. But first you need to know what this test is all about. So what is ACTIS? As I told you, ACTIS is an innovative English assessment tool developed by British Council. It has been designed for organizations and institutions so that they can identify English standards and they can select candidates or students with the right skills. The general version of this test is designed for adults, 16 plus, and it is mainly used for benchmarking the test takers based on A1 to C levels of Common European Framework of Reference for Languages. Just like IELTS, it tests all 4 English language skills, including reading, writing, speaking, and listening. And of course, these tests has been developed by test experts in British Council who have 70 years of testing and assessment experience, and it is backed up by recent assessment research. So it is really valid and reliable. But what makes APTIS so different from other existing tests? I mean, we have a lot of placement tests which you can use, but what is the element which makes APTIS different? Well, to me, the distinctive feature is the fact that this is a customizable test. It means that you are the one who decides which skill is going to be tested based on the needs that you have. So this means that APTIS is made of components, which means that, again, you can choose which component you want to be tested. You're going to have a core grammar and vocabulary component, which is the compulsory module. That means that you have to take it anyway, but you can mix it with any other component which you think is necessary for you. And that's something like having grammar and vocabulary plus reading, or grammar vocabulary with listening. Reading and listening at the same time, or 4 skills plus grammar and vocabulary. If we consider all these possibilities and all these combinations, you have 15 different packages to choose from. So it is really customizable based on your needs, and you can decide which skill you want to test. How is it delivered? Well, it is very flexible. Again, it is you who decide how, when, and in what way you want the test to be delivered. You can choose computer and online version of the test, or you can go with pen and paper delivery format. So it is up to you. But whatever format you choose, the result is going to be available to you in as little as 48 hours. So it's a very quick test, and you get the result immediately, almost. It has an innovating scoring system as well. I just want to stay to the timeline, so that's why I'm going a little bit fast. I want to focus on the examples which I provided at the end of this session. It has an innovating scoring because the candidate who is taking APTIS, the score which he or she is going to get for each skill is going to get mapped to CEFR. So the test taker is going to get a score for the core grammar and vocabulary section separately, based on a numerical scale of 0 to 50. And also, the test taker is going to get another scale, again, on a numerical scale of 0 to 50, but also levels, based on levels, A1 to C of CEFR. And these 2 scores together is going to make up the student's English language profile. This is an example for you. So here you see the skills, listening, reading, speaking, writing, and you see the score. So they're based on numerical scale 0 to 50, but also the candidate gets a score based on CEFR. So you can have different language proficiency level for each skill. And you can decide what is the level that you require. So if you're working in a school and you're asking your students to be placed by whatever test, this is one test that you can use. If you are teaching them and you want to see how they have developed, this is something that you can use. And I'm going to show you examples. What can APTIS be used for? So considering these features, that it is customizable, that it is using a scoring system which is based on CEFR, and the fact that it can be delivered in any way that you like, you can use it for benchmarking students' English language proficiency. And because this is the general version, you can use it both for adult students or with teachers. But still, we have the teacher version, which I'm going to talk about. You can use it for language audits to identify training needs. So if there are any needs for development purposes. You can use for filtering current teacher employees in your institutions for the sake of training or promotion. And finally, you can use to identify students who are ready to take IELTS. The difference between APTIS and IELTS is that IELTS is a high-stake test. It is mainly used for screening purposes, for universities and applications. But APTIS is used for placement purposes. So it is designed for low to medium-stake testing. Okay, APTIS for teens. Now, May I ask you, how many of you are teaching teens? Oh, nobody. How many of you are teaching adults then? And what are you doing? The rest of you? You're not teaching? No, okay. So I'm going to talk about teens very shortly. So I just want to show examples because I thought we have more teachers who are going to teach teens, but also I'm going to focus on the aptitudes for teachers. Aptitudes for teens is not exactly, almost the same test as the general version of the test. It is specifically designed for learners of English aged 12 to 15. But everything else is almost the same. It is using the same structure, the scoring system is the same, the length of the test is the same, the core grammar and vocabulary section is the same. However, the questions and the topics which are covered in each section are customized to the needs of teenagers. So your students, if they're teenagers, they do not need to worry about the context. They purely focus on the language that they need to use in those specific contexts. Why aptitudes for teens? Again, if you're teaching teens, you can use these tests to place them. I know that in schools, in most of schools, the English groups are formed based on language proficiency. I hope. I mean, in some schools they are formed based on the grades, no matter what the student's language proficiency is. But this is a test you can use at the beginning of the course to place your students properly and provide them with the right instruction. You can use it anytime to identify skills or any areas for development. So you can use it at the beginning of the course. You can use it in the middle as a proof of the progress for the student, or you can use it at the end of the academic year if you want to provide them an achievement report with British Council certification. It can also help guide decisions concerning your students' readiness, again, for taking IELTS, because most of the students who want to take IELTS usually panic. So this is a good preparation for them to get familiar kind of with the testing, standardized testing, and as a result, be better prepared for IELTS. What does it look like? Well, this is just one sample. I don't think you can see it, but I'm going to just explain the test. So this is a writing test, as you see, and this is a paper version, or the computer version actually, because you have the time remaining. So the platform shows how much time you have. You've got the questions on the side, and it shows also the progress over here. So how many questions you've answered. This is a writing test, and all the tasks in the aptitudes for teens are designed in a way so that they stimulate real-life activities which our teens are doing. For example, this one. You've got this photo, I mean the test taker has got this photo, and they need to write a comment below this picture. This is what our students do every single day. They're using Facebook, they're posting photos, and they're making comments about these photos. So this is a real-life task which they're very much familiar with it, and the only thing they need to worry about is just using the language. So they write their comment about this photo, and then also 2 other people have made comments about this photo. I'm blocking. And they need to reply to these comments. You see, so they provide a comment of their own, and then they reply to 2 different comments by somebody else. So it's a real-life task, and this is the way the writing is tested. Another example, reading. In this reading passage, the teens are going to read a short article about the ideal teacher. A risky topic, I would say. They need to read this article, which is taken from Teens magazine, so the context is very much appropriate for them, and they need to decide who says what by matching the paragraphs to the person who says that. This is the speaking test. We usually ask our teens to create posters and make presentations. This is exactly what this test is asking them to do. So they have this poster, which they need to use in order to make a 2-minute presentation. They have to paraphrase the information here and make a 2-minute presentation. So these are all real-life examples which are incorporated into this test so that the teens will feel comfortable with the test format and will focus on the language. Aptitudes for teachers. This is another variant specifically designed for teachers. This has been developed for educational sectors, so if they want to assess English language teachers' skills, which I know teachers do not like, or if they want to assess language proficiency of trainee teachers, they can use this test. Again, the whole structure of the test is the same. the scoring system is the same, the length is the same, the grammar and vocabulary section is the same. But again, the questions which are used in this format are very much connected to the teaching context. And they tap into themes which the teachers are familiar with, so they don't need to worry about the context. Let me show you examples. For example, for this writing task, the teachers need to write, they're attending a conference chat room, and they need to participate in this chat. So they need to answer questions. And let's have a look at the questions. So why did you decide to come to this conference? This is a question which is usually asked of a teacher, so the teacher can easily answer the question. What is the most interesting thing you are seeing at the conference so far? What do you think is the most difficult part of teaching? So you see all the questions posed are teaching specific, so the teacher can easily answer the questions. The listening section, a teacher is talking about a new assessment system. What does he think will happen? So you listen to the dialogue or whatever it is, and then you try to answer the question. And progressively, I believe the questions are getting more difficult, of course, to assess your level. For the speaking one, you've got two pictures of different classrooms. You have to describe what it would be like to teach in any of these classes. So you choose one of them and then you describe how it looks like. Now, why did we decide to introduce you to this test? This test is a low to medium stake test, I'm repeating. So this can be really used for placing teachers, employees, and students. And this is something that we are getting a lot. For example, IVE High School is using now APTIS routines for the recruitment purposes. They're using it for the students who apply to the schools. And they also, and there are many institutions who want to make sure that the teachers are on the right place in terms of the language proficiency use, and they want to track down their progress. So this is a test which comparing to IELTS is not very much high stake, obviously cheaper and easier to use, and it has been specifically tailored to the needs of institutions. Now, if you want to try the test yourself and see how it really looks like, there is a demo version of this test on this website, britishcouncil.org APTIS. And also you've got a full pamphlet in your booklet in your pamphlet which describes everything that you need to know about this test. The payment is very much depends on the package that you choose. So it has a core package of vocabulary, grammar, and based on the additions you make, the price goes up. But if you have questions about the pricing, then you need to contact exam department, which I'm going to give you the address.
Why is it called APTIS? Is it some abbreviation?
It is not an abbreviation, really. The reason why it is called APTIS is because it needed to be an original name, but it refers to the aptitude assessment. So you're checking the aptitude of the student. That's the origin of the name. Any other questions?
Can it be used by the universities to assess the level of their, for example, international relations or business administration?
Definitely. That's the version which you can use at universities is the general version of. Because that's designed for adults and C++. So if you are working in an institution and university, and for whatever reason you don't want to use IELTS, then APTIS is a second alternative, which is used widely around the world, especially in Europe, and it is a standardized test. So you can have the test results objectively in a standardized way, and you can have the certification, which is officially given to you by British Council. Yeah. Any other questions? No questions. This much about APTIS. Actually, I ran, so it's okay. We are going to have our coffee break, but if you've got any questions about the test, this is the address you need to contact, exams@britishcouncil.am. One more thing I want to indicate. So after the coffee break, we are going to have 3 representatives from different institutions who are going to share their experience of using international tests in their educations. And the last session is a mini workshop on British Council's continuing professional development. So if you do have time, please stay till the end so that you will participate in the workshop as well. Thank you so much.